American families are signing $1,500 monthly payments on $100,000 SUVs that sold for 40 grand 10 years ago. 84-month loans hit a record high. 1.73 million vehicles repossessed in a year, the most since 2009. Carmakers built this SUV epidemic on purpose, and dealerships bled every buyer who walked through the door. Now the lots are stuffed, the buyers are gone, and the prices are collapsing in a panic. So how did the family hauler become a $100,000 debt trap, and why are dealerships finally paying the price? To understand this, we first need to go back to what they took from you. 10 years ago, the Chevy Tahoe was the default American family truck. Back in 2015, you could walk into a Chevy dealer in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and drive a brand new one home for around $45,000. It hauled the kids, towed the boat, and nobody mistook it for a luxury product. It was transportation. The Suburban, the Expedition, the Yukon, all of them lived in that same working family price range. Then the car makers discovered something about their own customers. If you wrap the same steel frame in quilted leather and a bigger touchscreen, Americans will pay double. And once buyers paid double, the industry decided to find out if they would pay for a $100,000 SUV. The 2026 Tahoe now starts at $63,495, and the high country trim runs $87,035 with the diesel. A loaded Suburban Premier crosses $92,400. Those are the rungs on the ladder. At the top, the industry planted its flag. Lincoln wants $102,950 for a base Navigator. Jeep, the brand built on cheap and cheerful, pushed its Grand Wagoneer past $100,000. And Cadillac will happily charge you $170,895 for an Escalade V. The $100,000 SUV stopped being an exotic one-off and became a product category aimed straight at ordinary families. And it worked. In September of 2025, the average transaction price for a new vehicle in America crossed $50,000 for the first time in history, according to Cox Automotive. That is not a typo, by the way. 50 grand is not a fancy option package anymore. It is the average. A decade of markups, trim inflation, and killed-off cheap models turned the middle of the market into the top of it. Here is my problem with all of it. The vehicle barely changed. The Tahoe rides on the same body-on-frame layout it always has, burns gas through a big V8, and gets 16 miles per gallon on a good day. The only thing that transformed was the sticker. But the sticker was never the real trap. The trap was waiting inside the finance office. And the numbers coming out of that office are some of the ugliest I have ever covered. Edmunds tracks every financed purchase in the country, and their first quarter numbers for 2026 read like a warning label. The average amount financed on a new vehicle hit a record $43,899. The average monthly payment climbed to $773, another record. And a full 20% of all new car buyers are now signing payments of $1,000 or more every single month. Back in early 2020, that group was under 5% of the market. It has quadrupled in 6 years. The $100,000 SUV crowd sits at the very top of that pile. Finance a Navigator or an Escalade at today's rates, and you are staring at payments north of $1,500 a month. That is a mortgage in half the country, attached to a machine that loses value every single mile it drives. So how are regular families signing these deals at all? By stretching the loan until the math stops screaming. 84-month loans, a full 7 years of payments, made up 22.9% of new vehicle financing in the first quarter, an all-time high. Buyers are also showing up with less cash, with the average down payment falling to $6,206. Average interest sat near 7%, and subprime buyers were signing at 13% and 14% just to get the keys. Run those numbers together, and the loan is underwater before the first oil change. 7 years of interest on a vehicle that will shed half its value in the first 5. The banks know exactly how that story ends, and so do the dealers, which raises an obvious question about who kept pushing families into these loans. None of this happened by accident. There is a paper trail, and the federal government finally started reading it. Wait until you hear what investigators found inside the finance offices.
In December of 2024, the Federal Trade Commission and the Maryland Attorney General went after Lindsay Automotive Group, a dealer network operating stores in Maryland and Virginia. The complaint read like a how-to manual for squeezing buyers. Lindsay advertised low prices online, and once the customer was in the chair, mandatory fees and extra charges appeared that pushed the real price thousands of dollars higher. Investigators described a practice called payment packing, where the store talks the buyer into a monthly payment bigger than the vehicle actually requires, then quietly stuffs the gap with add-ons the buyer never asked for. Tire and rim protection, service contracts, guaranteed asset protection, hundreds or even thousands of dollars buried in the paperwork. And if hidden fees were the only trick, Lindsay might have survived the headlines. But then came the financing scheme. According to the complaint, Lindsay told customers they had to finance through the dealership to get the advertised price, including military families who already had cheaper loans lined up through their own credit unions. In April of 2026, the settlement landed. More than $75 million in customer charges became eligible for refunds, plus a $3.1 million penalty. You would think somebody inside those stores would have said something along the way. Nobody did. Lindsay was never the whole story, though. The FTC hit Leader Automotive in Illinois over pre-installed add-ons that customers were forced to pay for, and 10 dealerships in that group settled for $20 million. In March of 2026, the agency mailed warning letters to 97 dealer groups covering hundreds of stores nationwide, telling them to stop advertising one price and charging another. On top of all that, consumer advocates have documented buyers being pushed into opening brand new credit cards on the spot just to cover a down payment they did not have. A down payment on a credit card, rolled under a 7-year loan on a depreciating SUV. Picture a young nurse in suburban Phoenix sitting in that finance chair after a 12-hour shift, wanting a safe 3-row SUV for her kids, trusting the man across the desk to be straight with her. That is exactly who this machine was built to catch. But the fees were only the retail end of the scheme. The decision that actually created the $100,000 SUV epidemic was made years earlier in boardrooms in Detroit. And one boring old rule proves how insane that decision was. For decades, financial advisors have used one simple rule to keep car buyers out of trouble. They call it the 24-10 rule. Put at least 20% down, finance for no more than 4 years, and keep the total monthly cost of the vehicle, payment plus insurance, under 10% of your gross income. Boring advice. It also happens to be the exact opposite of everything this industry has been selling. Now run a $100,000 SUV through that rule and watch what happens. 20% down means $20,000 in cash before you leave the driveway. Financing the remaining $80,000 over 4 years at around 7% puts the payment near $1,900 a month. Add insurance on a $100,000 vehicle and you are past $2,100. For that to stay under 10% of gross income, the household needs to earn roughly $260,000 a year. The median American household earns just over $80,000. That income, under the same rule, supports a vehicle in the low $30,000 range, which is almost exactly what a Tahoe cost the last time these companies respected their own customers. Car makers spent a decade building and pricing a $100,000 SUV for a buyer who earns 3 times the median income, and dealers spent that same decade using 7-year loans to disguise it. The whole business model depended on nobody doing this arithmetic at the kitchen table. Honestly, I think this is the most damning number in the entire story. Worse than the hidden fees and worse than the interest rates. The flagship family vehicle of the American market is now priced for the top few percent of American earners, and everyone in the industry knew it. So why did they walk away from the very customers who built these brands? The answer goes back to a windfall that made every executive in Detroit lose their minds. During the pandemic chip shortage, dealer lots emptied out, and desperate buyers paid anything to get a vehicle. Markups over sticker became normal. Incentives vanished. For 2 glorious years, car makers and dealers posted the fattest profits in the history of the business. The mistake was what they did with that lesson. They looked at families overpaying out of pure desperation and decided that was the new demand curve. So they leaned in. Cheap models got killed off. Production shifted to the biggest and most loaded trims. And Mary Barra told investors that GM would not chase low-priced vehicles because the margins were not there. Nearly every rival made the same call in quieter language. By early 2026, the results were on paper. Cox Automotive counted 10 brands with average listing prices under $40,000. And even those affordable lineups had been stripped down, marked up, or squeezed by tariffs. Meanwhile, the average new vehicle listed above $50,000, while the average buyer needed a record-sized loan to touch it. The industry did not drift into this. It steered here on purpose, chasing margin over volume with both hands on the wheel. It is like a landlord watching tenants fight over the last apartment in town and deciding rent should triple forever. Scarcity pricing only works during the scarcity. The moment supply came back, every one of those decisions turned into a liability. But the executives could not see it yet, because one group of Americans was still buying. Wealthy households kept scooping up loaded Escalades and Navigators, and their purchases propped up the averages while the actual middle of the market quietly backed away. Cox Automotive analysts started openly describing a split market, with affluent buyers holding up the premium end while price-conscious buyers simply stayed home. And every vehicle those missing buyers did not buy went right back onto a dealer lot, where dealers pay interest on it for every single day it sits. Detroit celebrated the fattest margins it had ever seen. It should not have, because the wreckage was already piling up in the driveways of the people who had bought in. In the first quarter of 2026, 30.9% of trade-ins toward new vehicle purchases carried negative equity, according to Edmunds. Nearly 1 in 3 buyers walked into a dealership owing more on their old vehicle than it was worth. The average shortfall was $7,183. 26% of those underwater trade-ins carried more than $10,000 of buried debt, and 9.3% carried more than $15,000. Dealers happily rolled all of it into the next loan. Those buyers financed an average of $55,970, signed payments of $932 a month, and 43% of them stretched it across 84 months just to survive it. The Federal Consumer Bureau found that buyers who roll negative equity are 1.5 times more likely to have the vehicle repossessed within 2 years. And the repo trucks have never been busier. 1.73 million vehicles were repossessed in 2024, the highest total since 2009. And industry trackers watched the pace climb again through 2025. By the first quarter of 2026, 5.6% of all auto loan debt in America was at least 90 days behind, which is worse than the peak of the fallout after the Great Recession, according to the New York Fed. Behind every one of those numbers is a driveway. A warehouse worker outside Columbus steps out at 5 in the morning and finds empty concrete where the family SUV used to sit. He still owes on it. The repossession does not erase the loan, it just takes away the thing the loan was for, along with his ride to the job that pays it. Multiply that morning by more than 1 million households a year. That is what the $100,000 SUV Epidemic actually costs, and the bill was paid almost entirely by the people who could least afford it. The lenders noticed too. Loan rejection rates hit record highs, and the credit taps started tightening. The moment the easy money slowed down, the entire pricing fantasy began to wobble. And that wobble is where the buyers finally turned the tables on the dealerships. Americans stopped playing along. There was no protest and no boycott. They just quit showing up. And when demand disappears, fortress pricing turns into a fire sale with stunning speed.
Look at Jeep. The 2025 Grand Wagoneer started north of $85,000 and crossed $100,000 at the top of the range. Buyers said no in devastating numbers, and Jeep spent the year buried under roughly 130 days of unsold supply,
close to double what a healthy brand carries. So for 2026, Stellantis blinked. The new Grand Wagoneer now starts at $64,740. That is a price cut of more than $20,000 on the base model, and the long wheelbase versions dropped by as much as $35,000 compared to the year before. A company does not slash a third of the price off its flagship because the strategy is working. That is a company retreating from the $100,000 SUV with a white flag in its hand. Lincoln, the brand asking over $100,000 for a Navigator, entered the year carrying 133 days of inventory, far above a healthy level. One industry snapshot found roughly 9 out of 10 of certain Lexus GX and LX luxury SUVs still unsold months after arriving on the lot. Across the industry, 54% of all new vehicle inventory was being advertised below sticker by late winter, and manufacturer incentive spending climbed to $3,541 per vehicle by March, rising month after month. The exact same stores that were charging over sticker 3 years ago are now begging with rebates. And the sweetest detail in this entire story is where the pressure lands. Dealers pay interest on every vehicle sitting on their lot through floor plan financing. A $100,000 SUV that sits unsold for 4 months is actively eating the dealership's money every single day. The whole scheme ran on volume and desperation, and the moment buyers found patience, it started grinding through the dealer's own cash instead of yours. After 2 decades of hidden fees and payment packing, I will not pretend to feel sorry for them. But do not mistake this for the system healing itself, because what comes after the correction could sting buyers all over again. The market that survives this correction is split clean down the middle. Cox Automotive data shows luxury vehicles priced over $75,000 are actually turning faster than anything else right now, around 63 days, because genuinely wealthy buyers never left. The people who vanished are the stretched middle, the households earning 80 grand who were talked into $100,000 SUVs, and that creates a brutal problem for the industry, because the stretched middle was the volume. The rich buy one Escalade. The middle class bought hundreds of thousands of Tahoes, Expeditions, and Wagoneers, and those families are now sitting out, holding on to trade-ins that average more than 4 years old before they finally let go. Meanwhile, the affordable end of the market has been strip-mined. Vehicles listed under $40,000 are now the tightest supply in the industry, which props their prices up too. So the family that walks away from the $100,000 SUV discovers the cheap alternative was discontinued years ago. Both doors are closed. They built a $100,000 SUV for a country whose median household can afford a third of it, and that is the market they are stuck with now. And relief is not coming from the manufacturers. Nearly every automaker has already said the tariff costs they swallowed through 2025 will be passed on to buyers through 2026. The trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada comes up for renegotiation this July, and the early signals from Washington suggest it will be a brawl. If those talks go sideways, prices climb again on top of everything you just heard. The dealership spent 20 years perfecting the art of extracting the maximum possible dollar from every buyer who sat down, and it finally cost them the one thing the whole scheme depended on, which was trust. Buyers with patience now hold more leverage than they have had in a generation. The lots are full, the floor plan interest is running, and the price cuts have already started. Nobody in Detroit grew a conscience. America just finally did the math on the $100,000 SUV. The USMCA trade renegotiation kicks off this month, and whatever comes out of it lands directly on window stickers. Subscribe so you get the real numbers before the dealers finish spinning them.